Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is December 11th. On this day in 2003, tragedy shattered the calm of Walnut Estates, an affluent neighborhood in Mansfield, Texas. Inside their home, Rick and Suzanna "Susie" Wamsley were found brutally murdered. Rick was 46. Susie was 45. To the outside world, they were a devoted couple, raising their children, living comfortably, and enjoying the kind of life that many people dream of. But what police uncovered in the days and weeks that followed was a case that would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. Prosecutors would allege that the murders were orchestrated by the Wamsleys' own teenage son, Andrew. Today, we're talking about the murders of Rick and Susie Wamsley, an event that began as a family drama and turned into one of the most chilling murder-for-money cases in Texas history. Let's get started. Rick and Susie Wamsley were the kind of couple who looked like they had life figured out. Rick worked in finance and Susie stayed home and focused on raising their two kids. They lived in a quiet, well-off Texas suburb between Fort Worth and Arlington. It was the kind of place where Christmas lights lined the streets in December, not police tape. But behind that picture-perfect image, there was tension, especially between Andrew and his parents. In late 2003, he was 19, legally an adult, but still living at home and still under his parents' expectations. Prosecutors would later say that Andrew resented the structure and his parents' rules, and they believed that he saw a way out. And that way out involved the family's estimated $1.6 million estate. Investigators would also allege that the plan didn't stop with Rick and Susie. Andrew's sister, Sarah, was a target too. She just happened to not be home on the night of the murders. That detail alone bolsters the prosecution's claim that this wasn't an act of sudden rage. It was a plan that was deliberate, rehearsed, and designed to wipe out anyone standing between Andrew and a future built on inherited money. The Wamsley case didn't center on strangers or professional hitmen. The plot, authorities said, came together among a tight-knit group of young people. Andrew Wamsley and Chelsea Richardson had started dating earlier that year. Reports suggest that Andrew's parents disapproved of the relationship, which only added fuel to the fire. According to prosecutors, Andrew and Chelsea began talking seriously about how to get around his parents and how to do it permanently. Chelsea's roommate at the time, Suzanna Toledano, became part of that plan. Then came Hilario Cardenas, a man from Arlington who, the state said, supplied the gun used in the killings. He wasn't there when the murders happened, but prosecutors claimed that he was aware of the plan and helped arm the group. This wasn't one bad decision made in a moment of anger. Prosecutors said that the group tried and failed multiple times to kill Rick and Susie before they finally went through with it. So when we talk about conspiracy in this case, we're talking about something intimate. A triangle of relationships that prosecutors argued became an echo chamber for resentment, entitlement, and ultimately violence. According to the state's case, it was Suzanna Toledano who entered the Wamsley home in the early morning of December 11th and carried out the killings. Which, side note, I find to be really interesting. Suzanna wasn't the person who was set to inherit the money. She wasn't even dating the person who was set to inherit the money. She was the roommate of the person who was dating the person who was set to inherit the money. And she's the one who ended up carrying out this horrific act. Rick and Susie were both shot and stabbed. The violence was not only fatal, police thought it was personal. The state later argued that this level of brutality reflected more than just a desire to kill. It was about making absolutely sure there were no survivors. And again, that's where Sarah's absence becomes so crucial. Prosecutors are sure that had she been home, she almost certainly would have been killed too. What unfolded that night wasn't just a double homicide. It was the total collapse of a family from the inside. After the murders, investigators started where they often do, with the people closest to the victims. They began to unravel a story that pointed straight to Andrew's inner circle. And the break in the case came when one of the alleged conspirators decided to talk. Suzanna Toledano would eventually confess to being the one who shot and stabbed Rick and Susie. She claimed that Andrew and Chelsea had pressured her to do it, that she didn't just carry out the crime alone, but under the weight of influence and emotional coercion. Whether or not jurors believed every part of her version, her cooperation with prosecutors was key. Her testimony helped shape how the roles of each person were understood in court. And the legal outcomes reflected the way the justice system looked at each person's role. Chelsea Richardson was convicted of capital murder in 2005 and initially sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Tarrant County to receive that penalty. But in 2011, after questions were raised about withheld evidence during her sentencing, her death sentence was vacated. She is now serving life in prison. Andrew Wamsley was convicted in 2006 and also sentenced to life in prison. He was spared the death penalty. In court, prosecutors presented testimony suggesting that Andrew had even considered paying someone to kill Sarah to avoid splitting the inheritance, which was just another chilling reminder of how far this plan was allegedly intended to go. Suzanna Toledano pleaded guilty and received a life sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Hilario Cardenas, who prosecutors said supplied the gun and knew about the plan, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit capital murder and received a 50-year sentence. It's easy to see this case as a simple headline: teen kills parents for inheritance. But the horror goes deeper than that. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was, according to the state, a plot that unfolded in bedrooms, on couches, and in conversations among people who knew the Wamsleys' routines, their alarm codes, and their habits, and who used that knowledge to destroy them. Rick and Susie Wamsley weren't famous. They weren't involved in crime or scandal. They were parents trying to raise their kids and live their lives. And on December 11th, 2003, they lost those lives in their own home, a place that they'd built to feel safe. And it was all set in motion by the very person they had been trying to keep safe since he was born. This wasn't about strangers breaking in. This was about what happens when the danger is already inside of the house. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!